The Mafia boss found his secretary locked in a basement. He was too late. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy emotional stories like this one, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. It only takes a second, it's completely free, and your support helps us create more heartfelt and unforgettable stories. We'd also love to know where you're watching from today, so leave your city or country in the comments below and say hello. We truly appreciate your support. Now, let's get back to our story. Some mistakes cost money. Mine cost the only person who had never once asked me for anything. The steel door groaned as I drove my shoulder against it for the third time. Rust cracked like old bones, and the heavy padlock finally surrendered, crashing onto the cold concrete floor with a hollow echo that disappeared into the darkness below. The stale air rising from the basement smelled of damp cement, dust, and forgotten years, and for the first time in my life, I was afraid to take another step. My name is Damian Moretti. In New York, people lowered their voices when they said my last name. They believed I controlled half the city from behind polished conference tables and quiet conversations that never needed to become threats. They believed nothing happened without my permission. They were wrong. The only thing that mattered had disappeared right beneath my feet, and I had never seen it coming. My flashlight shook in my hand as its beam cut through the darkness. Metal shelves leaned against cracked walls. Broken furniture lay scattered beneath stained canvas sheets. Water dripped somewhere deep inside the room with a slow, relentless rhythm that sounded like a clock measuring every second I had wasted. "Claire," I called, but my voice barely sounded like mine. It was rough, uncertain, stripped of every ounce of authority I had spent years building. There was no answer, only silence. Then the light stopped moving. She was there, sitting against the far wall. Her wrists were restrained by worn zip ties that looked as though they had dug into her skin for far too long, though someone had already loosened them before fleeing. Her gray blazer was wrinkled, her hair covered part of her face, and her head rested against the concrete as if exhaustion had finally won the argument she had been fighting alone. My heartbeat pounded so loudly I couldn't hear the water anymore. I crossed the room faster than I remembered moving in years and dropped to my knees beside her. "Claire." Her name left my lips as a whisper instead of an order. I brushed a strand of hair away from her face with trembling fingers. Her skin felt cold, not lifeless, just frighteningly cold. A faint breath escaped her lips, so weak I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Relief hit me so hard that it hurt, but it lasted only a heartbeat. Behind me, Dr. Ellis reached us with the emergency team I had dragged across 3 boroughs in record time. He knelt beside her, checking her pulse with practiced calm while I searched his face for hope. Doctors always speak carefully. They measure words the way jewelers measure diamonds. But his eyes answered before his mouth did. "She's alive," he said quietly. I closed my eyes for one impossible second. But the word landed heavier than any sentence that could have followed. He looked at me with sympathy I neither deserved nor wanted. If we had reached her yesterday, her recovery would have been very different. Yesterday. Not last week. Not last month. Yesterday. 24 ordinary hours. 24 hours while I sat through meetings, signed contracts, ignored unanswered messages, and convinced myself my secretary had simply needed time away. I reached for Claire's hand. It barely moved in mine. She had organized every hour of my life, remembered birthdays I forgot, canceled appointments that would have become disasters, quietly stood between me and problems I never even knew existed. And somehow, when she disappeared, I had been too busy believing my empire was secure to notice the one person holding it together was gone. I lowered my forehead until it rested gently against the back of her hand. For the first time since I was 18 years old, I prayed for something money could never buy. Because deep inside, I already knew the cruelest truth of all. Finding her wasn't the victory. It was the beginning of paying for everything I had failed to see. 3 days earlier, I had walked into Moretti Global headquarters at exactly 7:30 every morning because Claire Bennett believed punctuality was a form of respect. She always arrived before everyone else. By the time I stepped off the private elevator, there would already be fresh coffee waiting on the corner of my desk, every meeting arranged down to the minute, every document marked with handwritten notes in neat blue ink. She never needed recognition. She simply made impossible days feel ordinary. That Monday began exactly the same. Manhattan shimmered beneath a pale sunrise, the glass towers catching the first light while traffic crawled below like a river of red brake lights. Claire stood outside my office holding a tablet against her chest. She wore the same calm expression she carried every morning, but something about her smile looked smaller than usual. I noticed it for only a second before my phone started ringing again. Investors, lawyers, international calls. The machine never stopped. Neither did I. Your 9 o'clock was moved to 10, she said. I also canceled lunch because the board requested another meeting. I nodded without looking up from the file already in my hands. Good. She hesitated. It was unusual enough that I looked up. There is one more thing, she said quietly. Someone has been asking questions about the executive floor. Report it to security. I already did. Then let them handle it. She gave a polite nod, but I caught the faint disappointment in her eyes before she turned away. At the time, I convinced myself she was simply exhausted. Looking back now, I realized she had been trying to tell me something that did not fit inside a calendar invitation. The rest of the day disappeared beneath contracts, negotiations, and endless conversations about numbers large enough to change lives, but somehow never changed mine. Every few hours, Claire entered my office carrying another folder or another schedule adjustment. She spoke only when necessary, always professional, always composed. Yet each time she left, she glanced toward the hallway as though listening for footsteps no one else could hear. By evening, the building had emptied until only security, cleaning crews, and a handful of executives remained. Claire knocked softly before entering one final time. You have been working for 14 hours, she said. You should go home. I almost smiled. That sounds like an order. It is a recommendation. Noted. She placed tomorrow's schedule on my desk with perfect precision. Good night, Mr. Moretti. Good night, Claire. Those were the last words I said to her before everything unraveled. I stayed another hour reviewing documents that suddenly seemed meaningless. When I finally left, her desk was empty except for a small succulent she watered every Friday and a framed photograph of her parents smiling on a beach somewhere in Maine. The overhead lights had already dimmed into night mode. I remember thinking she had probably gone home early for once. The next morning, her chair remained empty. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Human Resources assumed she had called in sick. Security insisted she had left the building the night before. I accepted every explanation because each one was easier than asking why the one person who never missed a day had vanished without leaving behind a single word. The second morning without Claire should have felt impossible, but everyone around me treated it like a scheduling inconvenience instead of a warning. Her assistant left a stack of unsigned correspondence on her desk. Accounting emailed to ask who should approve expense reports while she was out. Someone from marketing casually wondered whether she had finally taken a vacation. I answered none of them. Claire Bennett did not disappear. She prepared. She planned. She left detailed notes for everything from board meetings to coffee deliveries. If she intended to be away for even one afternoon, half the building would already know. I walked into her office myself. The room looked untouched. Her cardigan still hung neatly over the back of her chair. A fountain pen rested exactly parallel to a yellow legal pad filled with tomorrow's priorities written in her careful handwriting. Her calendar stopped at 4:15 on Monday afternoon. There was nothing after that. No cancellation. No goodbye. No unfinished sentence. The silence felt wrong. I opened the top drawer of her desk. Everything inside was perfectly organized except for one thing. Her apartment keys were still there. Claire never left home without them. A cold weight settled in my chest. I pressed the intercom. Bring security to my office. Now. Within minutes, the head of corporate security stood in front of me carrying a tablet filled with camera reports. We reviewed the lobby footage, he said. Miss Bennett exited the building at 6:21. Show me. The video played across the screen. Claire crossed the lobby exactly as expected, holding her work bag over one shoulder. She smiled politely at the receptionist before walking through the revolving doors and disappearing onto the sidewalk. Ordinary. Too ordinary. Continue, I said. Another camera picked her up outside. Then another. Then nothing. The recording froze for 3 seconds before jumping ahead, nearly 15 minutes. Why is there a gap? I asked quietly. The security director swallowed. We believe it was a technical malfunction. I looked directly into his eyes. Claire maintained this building's maintenance contracts herself. She personally approved every camera upgrade last year because she said blind spots created unnecessary risks. Explain to me why only one section of footage failed on the exact evening she vanished. He had no answer. Neither did anyone else in the room. I ordered every server examined, every backup recovered, every employee badge scanned. By noon, another detail surfaced. Claire's cell phone had never connected to a tower after leaving the building. Her credit cards had not been used. Her apartment had not been entered. It was as if she had stepped into the evening air and quietly vanished from the world. Then I noticed something that should have been obvious from the beginning. Claire always carried a leather planner in addition to her tablet. She trusted technology, but she trusted paper more. It was missing. I searched every shelf in her office until my fingers brushed against a small envelope taped beneath the lowest drawer. Inside was a single handwritten note in her unmistakable script. If anything feels wrong, start by looking inside your own house. I read the sentence 3 times before the meaning settled over me like winter. Claire had not been warning me about strangers. She had been warning me about someone close enough to walk through my front door every single day. The note never left my hand. The paper had already begun to wrinkle beneath my fingers by the time the sun disappeared behind Manhattan's skyline. I stood alone inside Claire's office, staring through the glass walls she had insisted remain transparent because, in her words, honest people should never fear being seen. I finally understood what she had been trying to tell me. She had seen something inside my organization that she could not ignore, and instead of protecting the person who protected everyone else, I had buried myself beneath meetings and signatures. I called only 4 people that evening, men who had earned my trust over decades instead of months. When they entered the conference room, I closed the doors myself. No assistants, no security, no phones. Someone inside this organization made Claire disappear, I said. The words settled over the room like heavy rain. No one spoke. No one dared. I placed her handwritten note on the polished table. She knew before I did. Marcus, my oldest advisor, adjusted his glasses and looked down at the paper. If she left this behind, she expected something to happen. Or she expected me to finally pay attention. I answered. For the next 6 hours, we rebuilt the last 72 hours of Claire's life, minute by minute. Every phone call, every visitor, every delivery, every employee badge scanned through every secure entrance. Around midnight, a single detail refused to fit. One maintenance contractor had entered the executive parking structure on Monday afternoon. His credentials were valid. His work order was authentic. But no repair had ever been completed. The company listed on the paperwork had closed 8 months earlier. The identity existed only on paper. We pulled additional traffic cameras from neighboring buildings. One recording showed a white utility van leaving the garage at 6:33. Another camera farther down the avenue captured the same van turning east. After that, it disappeared into the endless flow of New York traffic. It was almost 2 in the morning when Marcus quietly placed another file in front of me. This warehouse was purchased through 3 shell companies last year, he said. Officially, it is abandoned. Unofficially, he did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. The address sat less than 15 miles from my office. Close enough to reach in under 30 minutes. Far enough that nobody would accidentally wander inside. Rain began tapping against the conference room windows as we drove through nearly empty streets. The city looked different after midnight. Neon signs reflected across wet pavement. Traffic lights changed for cars that never came. Even the skyline felt quieter, as though New York itself was holding its breath. When we reached the warehouse district, every building looked forgotten. Brick walls, broken windows, rusted loading docks. Time had abandoned the neighborhood years ago. Then I noticed one thing that should not have been there. Fresh tire tracks cut through the rain-soaked gravel, leading toward a weathered building with boarded windows. The padlock on the front gate looked old, but the chain was clean. Someone had touched it recently. Marcus stepped beside me. We should wait for the police. I shook my head before he finished speaking. Claire had waited long enough. I pushed the gate open. Its rusty hinges cried into the empty night. Inside, the warehouse was silent except for water dripping somewhere deep beyond the shadows. My flashlight swept across abandoned crates, dust-covered machinery, and footprints leading toward a narrow staircase descending beneath the building. Each step downward made the air colder. Then I saw the steel door at the end of the corridor. A faint light slipped through the gap beneath it. My heart began pounding with a certainty that terrified me more than fear itself. Somehow, before I even touched the handle, I knew Claire was on the other side. The world became strangely quiet after we carried Claire out of that basement. Sirens faded into the distance. Rain continued falling against the ambulance roof in a soft rhythm that reminded me of every morning she had quietly placed a cup of coffee on my desk before I even realized I needed it. Dr. Ellis worked with calm precision while I sat across from her, watching every shallow breath as though my own depended on it. She never opened her eyes. Every few seconds I found myself reaching toward her hand just to remind myself she was still there. The drive to St. Vincent Medical Center felt endless even though the streets had been cleared for us. When we arrived, the emergency team moved quickly but without panic. They spoke in measured voices, asking questions I could barely hear. I answered automatically. Her name, her age, known allergies, emergency contact. I realized I knew every detail because I had read her employment file years ago, yet somehow I had never asked about the things that actually mattered. An hour later, Dr. Ellis found me standing alone outside the intensive care unit. His white coat looked impossibly bright beneath the fluorescent lights. Hospitals have a way of making every conversation feel permanent. He folded his hands before speaking. She is stable. The words should have relieved me. Instead, I noticed he had not smiled. Tell me the rest, I said. He studied me for a long moment. Physically, we expect improvement with time and proper care. What concerns me more is the exhaustion she has carried for days and the emotional strain her mind has endured. Recovery is not measured only by heartbeats. Sometimes the invisible wounds take longer. I looked through the glass window into her room. Claire rested beneath warm blankets while monitors blinked quietly beside her bed. Nothing about the scene explained how close I had come to losing the person who had quietly held my entire life together. Will she remember everything? I asked. Dr. Ellis nodded slowly. Most likely. Memory is not always the burden people think it is. Sometimes remembering is the hardest part. After he walked away, I remained where I was. Nurses passed with gentle smiles. Families whispered hopeful prayers. Somewhere down the hallway, a newborn cried for the first time. Life continued with remarkable indifference while mine had stopped completely. Marcus approached carrying a small paper bag. Her personal belongings, he said softly. Inside were her watch, her employee identification badge, and the silver pen I had given her on her first work anniversary. Beneath them rested a folded receipt from a neighborhood bakery dated 4 days earlier. 1 blueberry muffin, 1 black coffee. She had probably skipped breakfast again because she was preparing my schedule. I closed the bag and felt something inside me break without making a sound. For years I had believed loyalty was measured through contracts, silence, and results. Claire had measured it differently. She remembered birthdays. She sent flowers to employees whose parents were in the hospital. She stayed late whenever someone else needed help, never because anyone ordered her to, but because kindness came naturally to her. I had built an empire that people respected from a distance. Claire had quietly built a family inside it. Standing outside that hospital room, I finally understood why the building had felt empty the moment she disappeared. It had never been the office she organized. It had been the people she cared for, including one man who had mistaken her quiet presence for something that would always be there, until the day he almost learned what forever looked like without her. Sleep became something that happened to other people. I measured time by the soft beeping of hospital monitors and the changing light outside Claire's window. Morning turned into afternoon. Afternoon faded into another rain-soaked evening. She remained unconscious, breathing steadily while the city outside continued pretending nothing had changed. I stayed because leaving felt like abandoning her all over again. On the second night, Marcus quietly placed a cardboard archive box on the chair beside me. We found these in her office storage cabinet, he said. She labeled them confidential. After he left, I opened the box expecting contracts, financial reports, or meeting notes. Instead, I found years of carefully organized folders with my name written across every tab. At first, I thought they were simply records she had maintained as my executive secretary. Then I noticed the handwritten notes attached to almost every file. 6 months earlier, she had highlighted unusual payment requests from one of our suppliers and quietly redirected them for additional review. The investigation had uncovered accounting errors that could have cost the company millions of dollars. I remembered congratulating the finance department for their attention to detail. Claire's name had never been mentioned. Another folder described a charity gala where a guest unexpectedly attempted to arrange a private meeting with me. Claire had politely changed my schedule at the last minute, claiming there was a transportation delay. According to her notes, she had discovered the invitation was connected to people using false identities. She had protected me without creating panic or demanding recognition. Then came another file. And another. Flight changes. Background checks. Security concerns. Anonymous letters she quietly intercepted because she refused to let unnecessary fear distract me from important negotiations. Every page revealed another invisible decision she had made to keep my world steady while allowing me to believe everything had happened naturally. Near the bottom of the box, I found a small leather notebook I had never seen before. It was not a diary. It was a planner filled with reminders written entirely for other people. Send flowers to Mr. Alvarez because his wife starts chemotherapy on Tuesday. Remember Sophia's son's college interview. Ask whether the night janitor's daughter recovered from pneumonia. Order gluten-free meals for the legal team because Daniel was recently diagnosed with celiac disease. Every page reminded me that while I had been managing an empire, Claire had been quietly managing humanity. Tucked inside the final page was a photograph taken during our company holiday dinner 3 years earlier. I stood near the center speaking with investors. Claire stood several feet behind me, smiling as she helped an elderly employee carry dessert plates back to the kitchen. I had never even noticed she was in the picture. My chest tightened until breathing became difficult. The greatest protection I had ever received had not come from armored vehicles, security teams, or expensive surveillance systems. It had come from a woman who remembered everyone's birthday, noticed every small detail, and carried every burden without asking for applause. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Ellis stepped inside with a tired smile. There was a small change, he said. I stood immediately. Is she awake? He shook his head. Not yet. But a few minutes ago she squeezed the nurse's hand when we spoke her name. Hope is a dangerous thing when you have almost lost everything. Still, for the first time since that basement door opened, I allowed myself to believe Claire was fighting her way back. And I silently promised that if she ever opened her eyes again, she would never have to carry the weight of protecting me alone. On the 4th morning, I finally left the hospital for exactly one reason. Claire had spent years protecting my world. Now it was my turn to make sure the world she returned to deserved her. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, and every conversation stopped the moment I stepped inside. People looked at me with careful expressions, waiting for instructions, waiting for anger, waiting for the version of Damian Moretti they had always known. They never realized that man had stayed behind in a cold basement 3 nights earlier. I walked directly into the conference room where every department head had already gathered. No one touched the coffee set before them. No one opened a laptop. The silence felt heavier than any speech I could have given. I placed Claire's employee identification badge in the center of the polished table. This belongs to the woman who quietly protected every one of us, I said. Somebody inside this organization betrayed that trust. Nobody moved. I looked around the room, studying faces I had known for years. Some appeared shocked, others nervous. One avoided looking at the badge entirely. Effective. Immediately, I continued. Every executive account, every vendor relationship, every security contract, and every internal authorization will be independently reviewed. Nobody is exempt. Not even me. A few surprised glances crossed the room. They expected punishment. Instead, they received accountability. Marcus distributed sealed folders containing the evidence Claire had uncovered before she disappeared. False invoices, altered maintenance records, access logs that had been quietly manipulated over months. The pattern was undeniable. The betrayal had never happened overnight. It had grown slowly in the shadows while everyone celebrated quarterly profits and expansion plans. Claire noticed these irregularities weeks ago, Marcus explained. She documented everything. I closed the final folder and looked toward the large windows overlooking Manhattan. She did not fail this company, I said quietly. This company failed her. By sunset, several senior employees had submitted resignations before the investigation even reached their offices. Others voluntarily cooperated, shocked to discover how deeply the deception had spread beneath ordinary business operations. I gave only one instruction to every investigator. Treat everyone with dignity. Find facts, not revenge. The word surprised even me. Years earlier, I might have demanded immediate consequences. Claire had changed something inside me without ever asking permission. She believed people should first be measured by truth, not fear. Late that evening, I returned to the hospital carrying a small cardboard box from her office. Inside were her favorite blue coffee mug, the tiny succulent from her desk, the family photograph from Maine, and the fountain pen she always insisted wrote more smoothly than expensive digital tablets. I placed the box on the windowsill beside her bed exactly the way she had arranged it in her office. The room suddenly felt warmer. As I adjusted the photograph, I noticed movement beside me. Claire's fingers shifted slightly across the blanket. It lasted only a second, but this time there was no doubt. I leaned forward carefully. "Claire," I whispered. Her eyelashes fluttered almost imperceptibly before becoming still again. The monitor beside her maintained its steady rhythm, but something had changed. Not only inside her, inside me. I finally understood that real strength was never measured by how many people feared walking into your office. It was measured by whether the people who believed in you always found a safe place to come home. And no matter how long it took, I intended to make sure Claire Bennett would wake up to exactly that kind of world. When Claire finally opened her eyes, the first thing she looked at was the window. Morning sunlight stretched across the hospital floor, warming the quiet room with a softness that felt almost unfamiliar after so many anxious nights. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways, but none of those versions prepared me for the distance in her expression when she slowly turned and recognized me standing beside the chair. There was no anger, no accusation. Somehow that hurt even more. "Good morning," I said quietly. My voice sounded hesitant, as though I no longer trusted my own words. She blinked several times before answering. "How long?" "8 days." She closed her eyes again for a moment. I thought it had been longer. Neither of us spoke after that. The silence between us was not uncomfortable. It was fragile, like thin ice over deep water. Dr. Ellis entered a few minutes later, smiling with the kind of relief only doctors understand after watching a difficult recovery begin to turn in the right direction. He checked her vitals, asked simple questions, and seemed pleased with every answer she managed to give. Before leaving, he looked at both of us. "Healing takes patience," he said. "For both of you." The door clicked shut behind him. Claire kept watching the ceiling. "The office will need a new secretary." The sentence caught me completely off guard. "No." She gave a faint smile that never reached her eyes. "They cannot wait forever." "I can." She turned toward me slowly. "You should not." I stepped closer, but I did not reach for her hand. For the first time since I had met Claire Bennett, I understood that caring about someone also meant respecting the space they needed. "Everything has changed," I said. "The investigation is over. The people responsible are gone from the company. New security policies are in place. Nobody will ask you to return unless you choose to." She listened quietly. "I do not know if I can walk back into that building." "Then do not." She frowned slightly. "What?" "You owe me nothing. Not another meeting. Not another schedule. Not another impossible day." I drew a slow breath before continuing. "For years I believed loyalty meant staying no matter what. You taught me something different. Loyalty cannot exist without safety." Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes, but she quickly looked away toward the sunlight. "I thought I failed you," she whispered. "Claire." My voice broke before I could stop it. "You spent years protecting me from problems I never even knew existed. I was the one who failed to notice when you needed someone to protect you." She stared at the blanket resting across her lap. "I kept thinking you would realize something was wrong." Every word landed heavier than the last. "I know." My throat tightened. "And I did not. I cannot change that. I would give away every building I own if it meant changing that one mistake. But life does not bargain with regret." She looked back at me then, really looked at me for the first time since waking up. The fear I had seen in her eyes before was fading, replaced by quiet uncertainty. "What happens now?" she asked. I smiled sadly. "Now you recover. Whether you ever come back is your decision. Whether you forgive me is your decision. I will not ask for either." A gentle breeze moved the curtains beside the window, carrying the scent of spring rain through the slightly open glass. For the first time, I did not try to control what came next. I simply stayed in the chair beside her bed, grateful that this time, being present was enough. 6 months passed before I saw Claire Bennett again. Autumn had painted Central Park in shades of gold and amber, and Manhattan moved with the steady confidence of a city that believed every season promised another beginning. Mine had started much earlier, the day I realized power meant very little if the people who trusted you no longer felt safe standing beside you. Moretti Global looked different now. Glass walls had replaced locked executive offices. Anonymous reporting systems protected every employee. Mental health counseling was available to everyone, from interns to senior executives. Every major decision required transparency instead of silence. People told me the company had become stronger. I knew the truth. It had simply become kinder. I was leaving a meeting with a nonprofit foundation when I noticed someone standing near the lobby windows, sunlight spilling across a familiar blue coat. Claire held a folder against her chest exactly the way she always had, except this time there was no employee badge hanging around her neck. She looked healthier. The shadows beneath her eyes had faded, and there was a quiet confidence in the way she carried herself that had not existed before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city outside continued rushing past, while everything inside the lobby stood perfectly still. "Hello, Damien," she said with a gentle smile. It was the first time she had ever called me by my first name. Somehow it meant more than any title I had ever earned. "Hello, Claire." I noticed the folder in her hands. "Are you here for a meeting?" She nodded. "With the board." I raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? A soft laugh escaped her, the first one I had heard in what felt like another lifetime. "Only if you forgot to read your email." She handed me the folder. Inside was a proposal establishing the Claire Bennett Employee Wellness Initiative, funded jointly by the company and several charitable partners to support workplace safety, counseling, emergency assistance, and education for employees and their families. At the bottom of the final page was a signature line waiting for mine. "You created this?" I asked. "We created it," she answered. "You just did not know it yet." I looked at her for a long moment before signing my name. Not because the proposal required my approval, but because it deserved my respect. As I returned the folder, she smiled again. "There is one more thing." "What is that?" "I am not coming back as your secretary." I nodded. Slowly. "I would never ask you to." "Good," she replied. "Because I accepted a position as Director of Employee Relations." I could not help smiling. "You will probably end up running the place." She tilted her head with playful confidence. "Someone has to remind you to eat lunch." We both laughed, and for the first time the sound carried no sadness with it. As we walked toward the conference room together, I realized that the greatest miracle had never been finding Claire alive. The miracle was that she still believed people could change after giving them every reason not to. The city would probably always remember me as a man who built an empire. But if anyone ever asked what I was most proud of, the answer would never be found in skyscrapers, contracts, or influence. It would be found in the quiet footsteps beside me, belonging to the woman who taught me that protecting people begins long before they ever need to be rescued, and that the strongest leaders are not the ones who command the loudest voices, but the ones who finally learn how to listen.